Today we looked at the conversation between Jesus and Nathanael, who Jesus is being indicated by Nathanael that he can't be the Messiah because nothing good came ever out of Nazareth. And of course, we realize how much we live in prejudices, that we make assumptions about people just because of their heritage, and we generalize too easily, and that is just something that we like to do because we like to somehow put people into boxes to have clarity who we are dealing with, whilst at the same time we have to really get to know everyone individually. Every person is different, and therefore we have to be very careful with this. And Jesus doesn't really call it out, but I think that the Bible mentions it here is clear, to making it clear to us that we cannot make those kind of assumptions, and we have to always allow people to be who they actually are rather than who we think they are. In that sense, it is even more striking that Jesus basically ignores this challenge and basically directly almost seems to make fun of it by saying this is an Israelite in whom there's no deceit. Obviously, with that little comment, that indicates just that there would be deceit. But from Nathanael's perspective, he seems to happily embrace this like a praise that someone gets, and assumes that that is the truth. Therefore, he asks Jesus back, "How do you know that?" Assuming that it's the truth immediately. And you could argue that is quite rich that he assumes it. But what does this wording mean that Jesus says to Nathanael? Well, one, he has identified him as one of his disciples, and clearly as such, he is training them up to become basically the basis for the church that is to come. And that is how God actually changes people's hearts, where there is no more deceit in him. At that point, you could argue, because when you look at the question of, is there any deceit in any person? Well, of course, there's always deceit, because we are born into sin. Everybody is a sinner. And you look into the Old Testament, there's no difference to that. Even the greatest people of God, like King David, sinned and was deceiving others through trying to cover up for his sin. And so it is also in the New Testament. Even the apostles were not perfect in that sense. And Paul even calls himself the chief of sinners. And even after his conversion, so to speak, he was still sinning on the rare, but still on the occasion. And we see that with the thorn that God gave him to keep him conceited, not being big-headed, but also there are other occasions. Specifically, Paul himself says that he is not doing the things he wants to do, meaning that he should or ought to be doing. And that is because we are still in the flesh, but in our heart there's no more deceit. God has given us the truth, and that is, I think, the key thing that is conversed here or communicated to us, that we need to understand that once you're chosen by God for becoming the bride of Jesus, to be with him in eternity, at that point we are basically in the truth, and he is continuing to lead us further into this truth as we still live on this earth. The question comes is, when did actually Jesus know about Nathanael or saw him? And he talks about a fig tree, which is interesting, because you would wonder, why fig tree? And there is a reference that we find in Genesis, where God says that he found Israel like the first fruit on a fig tree. And that clearly here is a similar reference. So Israel was found under a fig tree, and the church is found under a fig tree. There's no difference between Israel and the church. We are all part of what I would say the new Israel or the new Jerusalem. And or you say Israel, because Israel has never changed. It's the people of God. Now, as Christians, we are all part of the people of God. We are the branches that have been grafted in, while others have been broken off. Not all Israel is Israel, Paul tells us in the book of Romans. So we need to look at this. This is the true identity of whoever is chosen as the bride for Christ. And the question is, when were we chosen? Well, that was at the beginning of time, before it actually, because everything was already planned. Every single person was planned who has been chosen by God for Christ. And we are placed across history for a certain time and location, as the Bible teaches us. And here we are placed to live for a specific short period of time. Paul calls it a time of short afflictions, to be trained up to understand the character of God, to fall in love with God, and to know and understand that only God is good. The world is evil, and we are not to expect anything from this world. We have to expect everything from eternity. And that's why we are here, to understand that whatever the world has to offer will never satisfy. Only God can satisfy, and to be with his Son forever and ever is the greatest gift we can receive. And for that we need to be grateful. Jesus then closes out his conversation with Nathanael by indicating to him that if already he starts to believe because Jesus told him that he saw him before he was actually physically in the vicinity of Jesus, then he should be more amazed even of what is to come, and that he will see that even the angels are ministering personally to Jesus. And that is a reference to Jacob's ladder, while we understand also that from what Jesus is saying here, I would not necessarily take Jacob's ladder as a literal ladder, but just a symbolic description of that angels are moving between heaven and earth, because they are serving God and they are executing God's will, and they are part of the Almighty's power to basically be in control of everything that happens on the earth. And even though that Satan is the king of the world, but that is only because, one, we have said we want to be ruled by Satan. That is the fall of man. And since then, through the desires of the flesh, we are always in submission to the will of Satan. We are rebellious against God. And that is what we need to understand. So whether we say Satan, whether we say the flesh, whether we say sin, it's all synonymous. This is what we are subject to until God calls us, until we are awoken in the Spirit. And that is what we typically say as becoming born again. And only then you have an ability to say no to the flesh. Before that, there's no other chance. So Jesus has freed us from that being subject to the devil as such, or the desires of the world. The world itself is such. So with that, he closes the conversation by mentioning and saying that he is the Son of Man. This title only Jesus gives to himself, which is a title that doesn't really make sense on the surface. And it's amazing that the whole conversation ends on this, because you would think like Nathanael must ask, why do you call yourself Son of Man? But the reason why he does so is, one, it is an example of the humanity that is within Jesus, he came in the flesh. But also it demonstrates the purpose for which he came. He came to serve man, meaning mankind is served through his sacrifice on the cross. That is the purpose why Jesus came. And that is how he has overcome the world, and we now can do likewise. And that is the importance of this title, that only Jesus calls of himself.